Inshallah, we're going to start in 30 seconds. So please come to your seats if you want to grab a snack or some coffee. Alaikum salam. Alaikum salam. Alaikum salam. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I begin in the name of Almighty Allah. I invoke His peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I ask Allah to extend His blessings to the Prophet's family and his companions and the men and women that walk in the footsteps, and I ask Allah to make us among them. Allahumma ameen. Jazakallah khair for joining us, guys. It's been a marathon with Surat Al-Nisa, obviously every single word, every single letter, every single ayah in the Quran means something. But I think the amount of rules and regulations and laws and injunctions in Surah Al-Nisa has been extensive that I think we're still on ayah number 25 or something like this. And this is our 6th session. And so we obviously have to give everything its due attention. And, we did not shy away from anything thus far. I think we talked about very, very sensitive things. I've actually been getting phone calls and text messages from people, all across California who've been watching the live broadcast. I've had brothers who reached out to me and they said, this is the first time I'm actually able to process the whole concept of, concubines and having sex with slave girls. It's the first time in my life I was able to, defend the Islamic position on polygamy or inheritance. I hope, inshallah ta'ala, that, and this is obviously, it's not my effort, by the way. I would not put the mental and the intellectual and the spiritual effort into explaining those things had I not found demand in the community and people who are interested in this subject matter. So, honestly, the gratitude is extended to you, for keeping me on the tips of my toes and for compelling me to do, the proper research. If it doesn't sit well with me, then it won't sit well with you. And if I don't feel it in my heart, then you don't feel it in your heart. And so I'm grateful, alhamdulillah, that we are a community that has been blessed with this opportunity to have, such difficult yet cordial exchange, about very sensitive topics, topics that pertain to the very essence of our deen and how we live our lives and how we see the world. And so, like I said, it's been a marathon, and I've more than often, lost my breath in the process. And Surah Al-Nisa, as I've said before, is an incredible treatise on the empowerment of the vulnerable and identifying the vulnerable segments of society in order to give them strength and give them empowerment, as I said before, is a sign of a civilized society. A society that only supports the powerful, it does not really deserve any type of praise. It is only when society lends its resources and its attention and its strength to people who cannot defend themselves and cannot fend for themselves is a society that lasts. We said that Surah Al-Nisa was revealed in that interim period between Hudaybiyah, when the Muslims signed the truce with Quraysh, and a time of peace was created, and ended, basically, the last of its revelation came down before the conquest of Mecca. And so you have about 2 years, and in those 2 years the Prophet ﷺ is sending emissaries and ambassadors to the heads of state around him, inviting them to Islam. In that time period, there's a lot of sort of outreach activities, if you will, where Muslim preachers and teachers are going around Arabia into the other tribes, talking to them about Islam, but also talking to them about Islamic values, right? If you don't want to convert to Islam, it's fine, but you have to give fealty to the state. and and honor its laws and honor its rules, and you will live a better life even if you don't convert to Islam. But in this dunya, if you follow the tenets of Islamic law, you will experience a better life. And I want us to always live by that paradigm, by the way. And don't let those Islamophobes decide for you how you feel about your own Sharia law, right? Don't let them scare you, from taking pride in what you stand for. Like I always say, for the longest time we thought that Islamophobia was genuine, was intrinsic, like people actually hated Muslims. And then over time we realized that Islamophobia is manufactured. And if Islamophobia is manufactured and financed, then it has a manufacturer. And if it has a manufacturer, then that manufacturer can be stopped. And so it's one thing for people to hate you, hate your guts for who you are. I mean, that's very unsettling. But if people hate you because they're misinformed, then we can just inform them, right? And so if Sharia is always portrayed in a negative light, it's not because there's anything wrong with it or just people hate us. It's just because there's some sinister people that have been spending billions of dollars in order to spread this misinformation about Sharia because they're so scared, from its power, right? And so, if you let people define Sharia for you as stoning the adulterers and cutting the hands, of thieves and burglars, although when you think about it, society seems to need some harsher punishments for its crimes. But if you let them define Sharia for you in such manner, then you will be discouraged yourself. Oh my God, how am I going to talk about Sharia? To my friends at work, all these non-Muslims who are so gung-ho about freedom and liberty and personal choice and civility and so forth, and we're still talking about cutting the hands of thieves. Man, this sounds like from ancient times. Subhanallah, I always say, wait a second, who gets to decide that cutting the hands of thieves is somewhat more cruel than putting thieves, in Pelican Bay for 7 years? Who gets to decide? Like you get an innocent person who made a mistake one day and stole something, like did shoplifting or something like that. And then you take that person and put him in medium security prison for the next 7 years. Guess what? By the end of the 7 years, what happens to that person? They truly became a hardened criminal because they needed to survive. There's tattoos and piercings all over them. They have already joined the gang. They might have actually killed someone in prison. Lord knows what happens to them. And then that person is isolated from their families, isolated from societies, isolated from their mosques, isolated from all the institutions that would have actually helped in their rehabilitation. That's not cruel? As opposed to, like I said before, you're going to be at the hospital for 45 minutes. I know. But who gets to decide? Can we give them a choice? Like, honest to God, if you're given a choice between being in prison for 7 years or losing your left hand, which one would you choose? Think about it. May Allah protect us from having to make such choices. But the point is, you lose your hand, you're gonna put a prosthetic on it, and you're gonna go home the same day, and you've learned a lesson for life. I'm proud of Sharia. And I've said this before. And we live in a democracy, right? So people get to decide. People get to decide which articles of the Constitution they want to keep and which articles they want to modify. Is it a democracy or not? Last time I checked. It's up to the people to decide, right? So they want harsher punishment, they will choose harsher punishment, right? In the presence of widespread corruption and widespread deterioration of social values, wouldn't you agree with me that society may actually have to adopt some harsher punishments to deter crime, right? In fact, what's the definition of martial law? Martial law is the suspension of all existing laws and the implementation of very, very severe punishments in order to deter crimes in the time of emergency or crises, right? That's the very definition of martial law. So why is it okay when there's a flood or when there's an earthquake or something like this and FEMA goes in and then people are looting Best Buy and Walmart, so the military will deploy and then you have the National Guard and then they will declare martial law and any tiny little crime will be punished by death in order to stop people from hurting each other. That's okay, right? But when we say that stealing, taking something that is not yours, you're going to lose your hand over it. Somehow that is cruel and unusual punishment. Although the requirements of conviction are so extensive, right? And the barrier is so high anyway, right? Yet we've internalized those values, and now we actually think less of our own teachings, right? And so if you take Sharia and break it down into what it is, and then you say to people, Sharia is about saying the truth. Sharia is about kindness. Sharia is about taking care of your neighbors. And if your neighbor is upset, you have a responsibility to go comfort them. Your neighbor cannot go to bed hungry. It's your responsibility to make sure that they have food, right? Sharia means that you take care of your parents in their old age. Sharia means that you honor your children and not kick them out of the house at the age of 16 so that they go find a job and then you and your wife can travel the world and have fun, right? Sharia means that you are honest in your business dealings, that you pay the contractor before their sweat dries, as the Prophet ﷺ says in the hadith, right? Sharia means that you pay your debts on time. Sharia means that you honor the elders in your community. Sharia means that a husband takes care of his wife, and even if she works, he's still responsible for her financially. Sharia means that your husband cannot cheat on you. Sharia means that your kids will honor you and obey you, even when they're adults. I can go on and on and on and on. That's Sharia. And Sharia means the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Surah Al-Nisa was revealed in that time where Muslim emissaries were going around Arabia, either converting people to Islam or sharing with them the tenets of Sharia so that if adopted, it would still bring value to their lives. And they would still live a happier existence, even if they choose to keep, the faith of their ancestors. And so there was like some lingering issues that remained in that community, kind of postponed because, of all the war, Badr and Uhud and, the trench and all of that took place. So as the Muslims are building their new community in the city of Medina, there's a lot of matters that needed to be addressed, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took advantage of 2 years of peace in order to address those internal matters, right? And the biggest of those internal matters was the rights of the vulnerable groups, okay? You want to define yourself as a civilized society, then you want to make sure that you honor the weak and the vulnerable, the voiceless, around you. Why was it called Surat Al-Nisa then? Because Nisa definitely is not a minority. Nisa is actually usually the majority group in any society. But, paradoxically, although women, always constitute the majority, they're always treated as what? Like they're the minority. They're always treated like they're the weak group. They're always treated like they're the vulnerable group, right? And so if you mistreat women, which is already a larger group, then you will definitely mistreat the orphans, and you will mistreat the children, and you will mistreat, the blind, and the disabled, and every other vulnerable group. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to tackle the issue of an-nisa, women, because like I said, women became symbolic of all the vulnerable groups, of all the groups that have been disempowered, so to speak. Empower women, you empower society. Empower women, you empower the orphans. Empower women, you empower captives of war, whatever it is. It doesn't matter, right? So that basically became the notion here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose women because women became emblematic, of all the vulnerable groups in society. And some of the other vulnerable groups that we've already covered, by the way, and we're like I said, we're ayah number 23 or 24. We've covered captives of war. We've covered refugees, right? We've covered orphans. We've covered children in general. We've covered women who are who lost their husbands. The widowed mothers. We've covered women in polygamous relationships. We've covered slave girls that have been taken captives of war and the treatment of slave girls, in a society, and we've talked extensively about that. We talked a lot about polygamy, and we also talked about inheritance. And when the father or the mother dies, what happens to their wealth and how that wealth is distributed. And we've talked a lot about this, and I think I talked about it multiple times. A little bit too much, I think. And we've gone through the rights of inheritance and the shares of every single person, in the event of anyone's death, and how that is super detailed in Islamic law in Surah Al-Nisa, right? We also talked about the financial rights of women in the event of divorce and what happens to the money as well. And we talked about mahrams. This is where it ended up last time, right? Who we can or cannot marry as Muslims. And it might actually be useful to go one more time through the list of mahrams, the people that we can or cannot marry. So who is a mahram? Really quick here. All right, we said that there is tier 1 of the mahrams, which is your ascendants, right? Who is an ascendant? And yeah, exactly. An ascendant is like an ancestor, right? So mahrams are your ascendants, and that includes mother. It includes paternal and maternal grandmothers, and their mothers, and so on and so forth upwards, right? So all of the mothers and the grandmothers and the great grandmothers, all of that, that is mahram, and that is all in your ascendants, right? And then there is mahrams into the descendants, right? People that come from you, right? So mahram, the daughter, the son's daughter, and the daughter's daughter, so the granddaughter all the way down, right? So what applies to the male also applies to the female. We would just say grandson instead of saying granddaughter, right? And then tier 3 would be descendants of one's parents, right? And again, there's no limit downwards. So your sister, full or paternal half or maternal half, your brother's daughter, your niece, and your sister's daughter, also your niece, and her daughters, no matter how far down, right? All of this is mahram for us. Men cannot marry. And again, if you switch genders, then you can talk about women. Tier 4 would be direct descendants of one's grandparents only. So your paternal aunt, right? Your father's sister, your maternal aunt, your mother's sister, your father's paternal aunt, your father's maternal aunt, your mother's maternal aunt, and your mother's paternal aunt. So all of that, so not just your aunts, but also your grandmother's sister and your grandfather's sister, and so on and so forth. All of that is mahram, which makes cousins what? Non-mahram, right? Because they're not included in any of this. Now there is a second category of mahrams, which is mahrams by marriage, right? Al-musahara. So now you have your wife's ascendants, her parents. So prohibition applies, again, from the marriage contract, and the majority of the scholars say that this happens even without consummation. So if you've done a nikah, you've made those relationships mahram forever, right? So obviously your mother-in-law, your wife's mother, and your wife's grandmother, paternal and maternal, no matter how far up it goes. But also your wife's descendants, right? Prohibition, and in this particular case, and this is really an interesting distinction in Islamic law, prohibition in your wife's descendants only applies after consummation. And this is really important. So your stepdaughter, right, which is your wife's daughter from a previous relationship, and your wife's granddaughters through her sons or daughters, no matter how far down, again, that is mahram as well. See how extensive and detailed this is? And I know some of you are thinking, this is too detailed. Like, what's the point, really? Why is the Quran so, painstakingly meticulous about all the tiny little relationships and how close they are? I'll tell you in a second, right? The wives of one's father and grandfather, right? And so your stepmother, that's mahram. The paternal grandfather's wife. Not that it is possible, for someone to marry his grandfather's widow, right? But just in case you thought about it, it is still mahram, right? The maternal grandfather's wife and the paternal grandfather's wife. Wives of one's sons and grandsons, right? And this is only from biological sons, not adopted. So if you adopt, it doesn't apply here. So your daughter-in-law, that's your son's wife, and if you're a woman, it would be if you're a woman, it would be your son-in-law, and the grandson's wife, sons and daughters all the way down, right? And then there's the wife's sister. And the wife's sister is permanent or temporary? That is temporary. You know, if you divorce this woman, then you can marry her sister. But for as long as you are married to this woman, then her sister becomes a temporary mahram, for you. And because she's a temporary mahram, she needs to be covered in front of her brother-in-law. That's really important. All the other forms, because they're permanent, a woman can take off her hijab and she can be among those men. But if it's a temporary relationship, because that person can still marry her, then she cannot remove her modesty in front of him. Then there is mahrams by breastfeeding, and this is the third category, right? The foster mother and all of her ascendants, right? So the woman that breastfed this person in infancy, and all of her ascendants, mother and grandmother and her sister and everyone, right? And then there is the foster daughter and all of her descendants, and there's no limit downwards to any girl that is breastfed by his wife while she was his wife, which is a really important distinction. Like if she breastfed someone else when she was not his wife, that person would not be mahram. Her daughters and granddaughters, no matter how far down. Then there is the foster sister and her descendants, any girl who shared the same foster mother or shared the same breast, right? Her daughters and granddaughters, no matter how far down. And then there's also foster aunts, and we talked about this last time. The wife's foster mother and her ascendants are also mahram. And the wife's foster daughter and her descendants are also mahrams, right? It would actually be nice if I had like a whiteboard and would have put this on a chart for you guys. It would have made a lot of sense, but I guess the document is here, the video is here. You can always refer back to it. And then there is the foster father's wife, right? So even the father, the co-wife of his foster mother, right? She's considered the foster father's wife. She's also a mahram. The wife of any foster grandfather, paternal or maternal, that is also a mahram. Then there is the foster son's wife, right? So if you were nursed by a woman and that woman has a son, that son's wife is also a mahram. Subhanallah. Also forbidden by breastfeeding, combining in marriage a woman with her foster sister. I think that goes without saying. Her foster paternal aunt, her foster maternal aunt, or any woman who is a mahram to her through breastfeeding, right? Fascinating stuff. What is the point of detailing all the mahram relationships in Islam? Let me rephrase. In any other faith, such details or rules do not exist. Like if you ask Christians today, are you allowed to marry your sister? You'd be like, ew, this is disgusting. But they won't be able to give you an actual legitimate evidence from the Bible that suggests that, right? They would culturally say, well, you're not supposed to marry your cousin either, unless, of course, you're from Arkansas or something like that, right? Then that would be okay. But again, these are all cultural determinations that change from one state to the other, from one culture to the other. But Christianity would not be able to say that, oh, look, in Christian Sharia, we actually have our rules too. Like all, the mahram relationships don't really exist except in Islamic law. Why is this so extensive like this? And the reason this discussion is so extensive, and I don't know if you've noticed, this discussion is in the midst of the regulation of Islamic sexual ethics. We've been talking about marriage, we've been talking about polygamy, we've been talking about having sex with slave girls and all of that. And then we talk about mahrams. And the word mahram basically tells you as man or woman who you can or cannot do what with. Yeah. Who you can or cannot have intimate relations with, or who you can or cannot marry, right? And so the detailing of mahram relationships is about the regulation of sexual ethics, is about teaching Muslims, men or women, who is it that they can touch? Who is it that they can make a physical contact with? You can hug your sister because you love your sister so much, right? But you cannot hug her with lustful intentions. Right? you certainly cannot marry her, right? SubhanAllah. Did you know that incestuous relationships are actually on the rise in the Western world? And now there is movements that are trying to deregulate the definitions of marriage. Because, in most states, I think last time I checked, in most states, like you cannot marry your mother, you cannot marry your sister, you cannot marry your daughter. And now there is a movement to deregulate that. It's almost like they're saying, you're the government, you have no business telling us who to love. Remember last time we heard this 15 years ago and we said that it was going to be a slippery slope? And then they made fun of us? Remember when Proposition 8 was on the ballot? And we said if you allow men to marry men and women to marry women, then you're getting into the slippery slope. And one day someone is going to tell you, I want to marry my sister and I want to marry my son and my daughter and everyone. On what basis can you as government or society say no to incestuous relationships when you have said yes to homosexual relationships? What's the distinction? What's the distinction? Give me one legitimate argument to say yes to one and no to the other. There isn't any. And so we selectively decided that this is okay, but that's not okay. And if you selectively decided without any type of proper logical background, well, guess what? The same people that requested the first one are going to request the second one because they got sick and tired of this. Let's try something else. Right? Yes.
Well, the ones that are making the rules in the government are the ones going Epstein files, right? So they're closed doors that they would not legalize this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They're also trying to legalize or normalize, I should say, or whatever they're doing with pedophilia as well. So the same movement that you mentioned.
There is a movement, by the way, to legalize pedophilia. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I read about this. Now they have their own, online platforms, and they have their Facebook pages, and they have their existence. Why are you condemning me? So the argument goes, for loving a 10-year-old girl. I'm serious. I'm serious. This is a legitimate, well, I shouldn't say legitimate. It's a real movement now that has hundreds of thousands of people, and those are the ones that dared to go online and to declare who they are. And their names are mentioned as members of the group. Now imagine how many other people are doing it like secretly without telling society who they are. Right? And so again, the Western way of dealing with sexual impropriety is denial. The Islamic way of dealing with sexual impropriety is institutionalizing. We create rules in order to absorb natural human tendencies. We create laws. We're not in denial. We understand that there are problems that need to be regulated, right? And so going back to mahram, mahram rules are designed in order to define for us as society who we can or cannot marry, who we can or cannot have sex with. This is the very purpose of mahram rules, in order to define the concept of the family. So essentially what this is trying to say is that a man can only have, or a woman for that matter, can only have intimate relationship with a legitimate partner that is institutionalized within what we call a family. And having contact with anyone outside of that structure would be considered haram. In fact, the Quran calls this sifah. What is sifah? What does safaha mean? Sifah means when people are sleeping around, when people are having like unfettered sexual relations, promiscuous behavior. That's called sifah in Islam. Why is it called sifah? The word safaha is the same word that is used when you do dhabiha, right? Dhabih and safih actually means, mean the same thing in the Arabic language. Dhabih is to slaughter and spill the blood, right? Safih is the one whose blood is spilled, right? So safaha means to spill something, right? Safah al-ma, that means you spilled the water. So the word for promiscuous behavior in the Arabic language is sifah, which means what? Which means spilling the fluid of life that comes from the man and the woman for no purpose at all. sending it to absolute utter waste, basically, right? It's fascinating. Just ولا مسافحين ولا متخذين أخدان, as we will see it here in Surah Al-Nisa, right? That when you have intimate relations, you're supposed to be musafih. You're not supposed to be having intimate relations in a wasteful way with people that are not family, that cannot bear your children. Meaning you're having sex for the sake of lusts and pleasures, not for the sake of family and security, right? وَلَا مُتَّخِذِينَ أَخْدَانِ. They don't take أخدان. الخدن, is like a girlfriend or an illegitimate partner, right? So neither are you allowed to have like these promiscuous relationships, or are you allowed to have a mistress or a sidekick, whatever, even if it's a committed relationship, which is fascinating. Please.
Since we have this, we just went through this comprehensive list of harams, like in light of or in alignment with genealogy and genome, study of genomes and stuff like that, like what is a good way to reason with someone who asks why is a cousin haram? I've had that question. I've tried my way, but I'm interested to know what the
Why would a cousin be mahram? Why should the burden of proof be on you and not the other person? Like the other person is like, you have to ask him, why do you think that the cousin is supposed to be mahram? Well, it's the law. Like on what basis? It just is just a cultural basis. You're not really saying anything legitimate. Things are supposed to be permissible by definition unless something prohibits them. So we assume that all relationships are permissible unless God says otherwise. So God said this is one of other relationships that are. See, we're all cousins in the end, Brother Dabihullah. And so if I prohibit the first cousin, am I going to prohibit the second cousin? If I prohibit the second cousin, am I going to prohibit the third degree cousin? Like, where do I stop? Where do I draw the line, right? And so we drew the line from immediate ascendants and descendants, and we drew the line with ascendants and descendants with marriage, and ascendants and descendants with nursing. That's our comprehensive criteria. That's it. 3 categories, right? Blood, marriage, and nursing. Ascendants and descendants. That's how we do it. It's very simple. Right? So if you want to deviate from that rule, you need to tell us why not. Right? I think that would be approach. Don't let them put you in a defensive position. I don't know. Enlighten me. Tell me why they're not supposed to be married. Even in America, it's legal for cousins to marry. Right?
Imam Aziz, on the list that you went through, I think the deeper insight also is that it has a genealogy bearing to it. I mean, if you look at the list that it prohibits who you can marry and who you can't marry, if you look at the genealogical consequences behind those,
Like DNA and all that?
the lineage,
Mm-hmm.
I think you'll also have a lineage that would be genealogically offset with deficiencies as well.
Agreed, and I think I have to do this research to verify. But my guess is that if you marry anyone on the list of mahrams, then the child that is born will always have 2 identities. Will be both son and cousin. Will be daughter and sister. It will always have 2 identities.
The perfect example would be the people who worship fire from Persia.
Zoroastrian? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They have a lot of genealogical issues.
Fascinating, because fathers can marry their daughters in Zoroastrianism.
Dying out.
They are dying out.
I've seen them in person in the community, and a lot of them look deformed,
Yes.
and a lot of them have a lot of issues. Like it's amazing. A lot of them have health issues, but either they're limping or they have structure of their face is very different. I'm not saying every single, but it's
Sure.
very noticeable when you're in a community hall with a bunch of Zoroastrians,
A lot of
and you can
inbreeding.
see visibly.
Ah, that's So they're mostly what, Iranian? They're Indian. Indian.
Iranians that travel further to India.
I see. I see. Well,
You
that's
see a lot of genealogical
like a lot of deformities and stuff like that.
And if you marry outside of that community, you're kind of disowned.
Also, they're encouraged to marry from one another.
Oh yeah, that you can't
Mm.
marry outside. That's why they're reformed. They have a lot of issues.
And they've been doing this for thousands of years. Mm. Subhanallah, fascinating. It's it's the sunnah, by the way, is to marry people from other tribes and from other families, as much as you can. It's not haram to marry your cousin or to marry people that are closer to you, but it's better to marry people that are a little bit further away. In general, right? And this was before any type of research on DNA or anything like that. But I want to go back and I want to refocus, okay? So we're defining who we can or cannot marry. And we understand that the Quran does this in order to maintain the integrity of the Islamic sexual ethics, in order to tell us exactly, who we can be intimate with and who we cannot be intimate with. And the people that we can legitimately be intimate with are called family. And the people that we cannot be intimate with, they are outside of that realm when it comes to intimacy, right? So I want to make a comment here about sexual desire in general. You can talk about sexual desire from a biological standpoint, obviously, but you can also treat sexual desire as a social phenomenon. You can treat it philosophically as well, and I want to talk about it from those two angles, from the philosophy and from the sociology angle, right? So there is a sexual appetite in any society. Right? Man has his sexual appetite no matter what. It would be absolutely ridiculous and ludicrous to assume that it does not exist, right? In fact, if it doesn't exist, I don't know if you want to be with that man, right? And so man's sexual appetite will manifest itself one way or the other, right? And I've seen this in the course of my career, right? And so men will have their needs and they will have their demands and their expectations. Either it'll manifest itself by putting undue pressure on his wife. And I know this may sound funny or embarrassing to some of you, but we have honest relationships here, honest discussions as adults, right? Every couple months or so, there is a sister that comes to me and she complains that she's not able to get anything done because she's always under the gun. She's always being asked to give herself up for her husband. Some of those things happen once a day. Sometimes it happens more than once a day. And if you ask, oh, Imam, they're probably newlyweds. I was like, no, they've been married for 25 years, all right? And so that appetite will manifest itself, in a strictly monogamous relationship, it'll be like this. Maybe the wife is not going to be able to do much with her life. I don't know if she wants to live like this, right? And I'm talking about the modern age. I'm not talking about the Islamic way of doing it. I'm talking about how it happens today, right? Or it'll manifest itself by cheating and infidelity. Wouldn't you agree? Like if she refuses him, then he might consider other options. It might manifest itself, through sexual exploitation and remarks, through sexual harassment, by making comments to his coworkers. It might manifest itself by that man going online, They have these websites now that people subscribe to, in order to follow girls and stuff like that. There's Instagram, OnlyFans, whatever it is that, people have been using recently. Or it might also manifest itself, when they seek prostitution and escorts and so forth. And you might think that this is impossible in our Muslim community, right? 2-3 times a year at least, there's a Muslim guy that gets arrested because he was caught with prostitutes. Brothers in our own community. Right? People that you see at Salat al-Jumu'ah. I'm not talking about people who are removed from the faith. These are brothers that come regularly to the masjid 2 to 3 times a year. I get entangled in some kind of a legal case where this poor guy is mixed up with some kind of escort or prostitute or whatever. And see, it's interesting because the police or the sheriff, they selectively prosecute cases of prostitution. Because prostitution in general is tolerated in America. So they will, kind of apply pressure selectively when they need to. And, I don't know how you feel about this, but when it's a Muslim guy, that is always like a pretty good target. Or it would manifest itself, through exposure to pornographic sites and material. And when it gets really, really worse, some of you are talking about, pedophilia and underage and stuff like that, it would manifest itself in, some of these men who are so saturated with everything else, so they go into what? They go into pedophilia. And again, I'm not trying to shock you or to make you think less of your own community, but 2 years ago, a brother in this community, a physician, who was caught producing pornographic images and videos for little girls. And we're not saying here little girls as in 15, 16, or even 12, or even 7. These are 2-year-olds. I don't even know how that is possible to begin with. This is someone that used to come to the masjid, used to come to Surat Al-Tarawih. And I was asked to write a character letter for him. And I couldn't. I was torn because on the one hand, I am not sure if he's guilty or not. They say that they found this stuff on his phone. They say that they found this stuff on his laptop. They say that they found it on his tablet. His argument is that I don't put any security on my devices, so anyone could have done this to me in order to ruin my life. In my heart, I felt he was not saying the truth. But then at the same time, I was like, okay, who am I to judge? But then on the other hand, I also feel like, what if this guy goes away for 25 years when he hasn't committed a crime? So I was really torn whether I should write a letter, to state what I know about him. And so after a lot of thinking and a lot of pressure, I actually wrote a letter. And initially I refused, but then I wrote a letter and I said what I know. I said, I see him at Jum'ah, and I said his kids come to our programs. I said that he donates to the masjid, and I said that he comes to Salat al-Tarawih, and that I've never seen anything bad from him, which is the truth. So I stated what I know, and I did not say a single word beyond that. He was eventually convicted, and I think he's now just awaiting his arraignment, in order to know how many years he's going to be behind bars. Probably it's going to be a very, very long time. But the point is, there is a spectrum of behavior in which man's sexual appetite will manifest itself. It will manifest itself one way or the other. And so, I'm going to share with you some statistics. In 2024, this is a year and a half ago, when the report came out. 1 in 3 women in America experienced one form of sexual harassment or the other. In 2024, after the Me Too movement, with all the heavy enforcement of the laws, every single state has massive legislation. All the sexual harassment rules at the workplace, or the kind of stuff that they put you through, and all the meetings and all the workshops and the seminars and everything. 1 in every 3 women in America in 2024 experienced some form of sexual harassment. Just want you to ponder upon this, right? Over a lifetime, 81% of American women will have experienced one form of sexual assault. 81%. Which means, it's just another way of saying all of them, right? In 2024, this is just going to shock you. In 2024, 127,000 cases of rape were reported. In 2024, and by the way, statistics suggest that for every reported case, there is 3 unreported cases, right? Which means that you want to multiply this by 3 or 4 right away. Which also means that in 2024, at the height of our civility and honor and law enforcement as a society, there's about 500,000 American women that were raped. 500,000 in 2024. The point is, the measures that Western society has taken, the laws and the rules and all the sexual freedoms and everything, all the pornography and all this stuff, it did not work. It did not achieve its purpose in protecting women. Uncontrolled, unfettered freedoms did not protect women. They did not protect men either, by the way, because you would think that men are always the villain in all of this. Well, men are also victimized by all of this stuff, right? And so, again, I said earlier that where in the world do you not see any type of rape or sexual harassment or assault? Name one country where that stuff simply doesn't happen. You don't see that in Saudi Arabia. There's no such thing like that over there. You don't see that in the UAE. There's no sexual assault in Kuwait. Why? Not in Saudi Arabia though. Not in Kuwait. And not in the UAE. It's just in Dubai. Let's be honest, right? I agree. I partially agree with you, but that's not the reason. Yes.
But they also have multiple wives.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
That's one of the reasons.
They have multiple wives. Their concept of the family that has the women that you can have physical contact with is so intact and is so clearly defined. Therefore, there is no incentive for those men to have any other relationships beyond that, right? And additionally, their laws are also very, very strict. Like in Saudi Arabia, if you're accused and convicted of rape, what's going to happen to you? Execution within like 24 hours or 48 hours. It's so quick. Justice that is delayed for 25 years is what? Is the worst form of injustice. You can have all the laws that you want, but if those laws are not enforced, you arrested the guy, and then you're putting him in California prisons, fed and housed and taken care of by taxpayers for 25 years, and still, the justice was not served. What do you call that? Thank you. You want them to stay alive because there's an industrial complex. You have millions of people in that system, and they're producing stuff, they're consuming stuff, they're free labor. This is modern day slavery, and it's necessary to keep because it's making a lot of families very, very wealthy. Yes?
So quickly, I just want to mention the contrast between the Islamic world or the Islamic culture and the Western culture. So many things you mentioned, like the freedom of women and men in this country to dress any way you want, to do anything you want, yet has not produced them a peaceful life or a clean life or a respectable life for women, if you really think about it. Yet the Muslim world is constantly being attacked, that women are being repressed. Although, of course, in some countries
There's some
no
repression.
doubt,
Yeah, of
no
course.
doubt.
Yeah.
But to the level of women being repressed in this country or the Western world is completely ridiculous if you put them next to each other. The fact that you could be raped and your rapist sitting in jail, like you said, eating 3 meals a day and building his body, while in the Muslim
That's
world,
right. That's right.
you rape a woman and you're gone. You're dead.
Yep.
So really, where's the respect for women?
And not only that, I think there is, like, if you, and I want to be careful what I say because, people, especially women, get so sensitive about this subject. Like, if any of us, even as little as made a comment about how women dress in the Western world, we're going to be ostracized and attacked in 1 second. Well, dude, just hear me out. I am not suggesting that the way that you are dressed had anything directly to do with sexual harassment or anything. I'm not saying that if a woman dresses like this or wears a bikini or whatever, that makes her immediately vulnerable for sexual harassment. I'm not even going to say that. All I'm going to say is that constant exposure of women and them seeking that type of exposure and normalizing this exposure and creating all these men and creating all the sexual tension that comes with this, that tension is going to be vented out one way or the other. It may not be vented out against you in particular, but it's going to be taken out against somebody else, right? And if there's so many men with sexual tension that needs to be vented out, then that economically speaking, that creates what? It creates demand. It creates Johns. It creates more men that seek prostitutes. It creates more men that seek pornography. It creates more clients for OnlyFans. It creates more demand for, naked Instagram influencers, right? And so maybe in your particular case, you decided, I'm just going to walk half naked in life. I'm an American. I can do whatever I want. But essentially what you did, you may not have harmed yourself as a person. Well, you have spiritually and in many other forms. You've debilitated your own integrity, and if you reduced yourself to flesh, that's your choice, right? It's none of our business. But what you did is that you've created a culture in which it's okay to objectify women. And if they can't have you, well, guess they'll have the next one. And if they can't have the next one, they'll have the one on the internet. And if they can't have the one on the internet, they'll have the other one by force. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be you. And again, I am not saying that, I'm accusing those women. You're responsible for, sexual assault against other women. Again, these things happen indirectly. I don't think there's any sinister intentions. All I'm saying is that the way, in the absence of values, in the absence of religious guidance, in the absence of the hierarchy of society, the patriarchs and the matriarchs, in the absence of religious leadership and guidance, in the absence of traditional values, people made bad decisions on their own, decisions that at the time looked okay. It sounded like a good idea at the time, but ultimately had severe ramifications to society itself. Again, that's my own commentary. You don't have to agree with it. It's my own commentary on the male sexual appetite and how it manifests itself and how Western society responded to it and how Islam tries to regulate it.
Imam, I even say your commentary is true. I'll tell you why.
Hmm.
Because what you're saying is, in a deregulated system, it sets up these individuals to fail because they have to go through their sexual deviancies in a haram way. In the system that you mentioned that is Islamic and is proven in the world, Islamic world, there's defined characteristics that can occur within the family or what's halal and haram that avoid these deviancies because it allows the man to do it in a halal way.
Correct.
Where in this society, you're ostracized to have two wives, but if you have a girlfriend or a mistress, you're okay.
Absolutely. You can have a multitude of those.
You're
Mhm.
okay.
Yep.
You're
Yep.
successful.
Agreed. Or if you follow 5 particular girls on OnlyFans,
Yeah.
those people live with those girls like 7-8 hours a day. And I don't mean live with them as in their houses. They live with them online because the concept is that these girls have multiple cameras on them 24/7. As they eat, as they drink, as they shower, as they talk, as they move, as they sleep, whatever. And these guys are with them, 7-8 hours a day. They live with them.
No,
That's okay.
Imagine that same man having the opportunity to marry someone.
It'll be the end of the world.
That business will go out of business.
It'll be the end of the world, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, sister?
So I have two separate comments. One, I think it's very accurate that we're reflecting a lot of the things you're talking about in the American society. So kind of taking perspective of we've seen it, we've lived through it. I began my professional career in the 9/11 era, and I've had this conversation with people where at that time Islam was under the microscope. Like based on how you dressed, how you walked, how you talked, you were always under the microscope. You were being judged as a unit. You're the reflection of Islam in your activity.
Hmm.
And I had these conversations with some of my coworkers that would come to the office or they would have a picture on their desk of their kids, like the husband, wife, and the kids at a pool party. And I'm like, how do you stand in front of your son with, like, for example, a bathing suit, right? We would have this conversation in a very neutral topic, right? Things that seem very normal to them. And one of the things that I've concluded just from interacting with people at all levels of the professional ladder and tiers is that America is literally taking pride in something that is setting itself up to implode. Because what they're taking a lot of pride in is that we don't have an entity outside of the Constitution that we hold as our guide.
Hmm.
And the Constitution is open for human interpretation.
Well, it's man-made to begin with.
Exactly.
Mhm.
It's man-made. They take a lot of pride in not aligning themselves with a religion, aligning themselves with some sort of a divine pathway of how to live, interact with human beings. And they take a lot of pride in that. And they kind of scrutinize anytime you bring religion into the conversation. So
Mm-hmm.
because there's a lot of song and dance and distraction and the clothing and it's all like it's fun. They're easy to
Right. But not the Muslim Indians.
not the Muslim, it's
Mm.
the Hindu,
Mm-hmm.
the religion,
Right.
the Hindu religion, because they'll have like the Holi festival and then the Diwali festival, and but Eid isn't mentioned because it has an attachment to a religion. So my comment is this: I think that you started this session with how important, or why does the Quran Sharif really go into detail? And I think it's important because unless you know this information as a parent, you really don't know how to navigate in this world anymore, because nobody really is going to give you that information. And to kind of guide your child in a direction that's going to allow them to be, to your point, to be proud of their religious stance and their ability to kind of live a certain way, is only going to come as a parent if you have the credibility with your child, right? And if you live in that way, you have the knowledge, and I think that's what one takeaway for me as we're
Mm.
talking about
Mm.
this is that we can talk about back in back home we did this thing in a certain way, right? So, but you really have to live very differently in this society as a parent and live and apply these rules. Like for example, when I go to my office, um, I make a point that my kids know that I have these conversations with my coworkers about hijab and the interaction between men and women coworkers, and it's not just a generic anything goes, and there's boundaries for a reason.
Right. Right.
So a simple thing like having a meeting, if it's of the opposite gender, it's going to be virtual. It's not going to be in a room, and like that's a requirement. My kids know this, right?
Mm-hmm.
My husband and I, we make a point of interacting with our kids in that way, so that they're now reaching that point of being in a professional environment. They don't hesitate. They're not shy about their requirements and their boundaries and their criteria.
Agreed.
So that's one part of it. The other part of it I'm sort of like struggling with, because I think I don't have as much access to it. I only know what I see in the news. Is you have Muslim societies that have used these rules and created these environments where the men and women interaction is non-existent, really, right? And there's really no real pathway to figure out how do you interact with the opposite gender. How do you, because in Islam you're allowed to, work, be a coworker, be a student. You're not supposed to live two parallel lives based on gender, right? And I think that, and I'm not going to name a specific country, but I heard it in the news, and it was like the number one utilization of these sites you talked about is happening in a Muslim country, and they are like the number one users. The top percentage of users come from a specific Muslim country, according to Western media. But I've got to take that as fact, right? Because I don't know any different. But so that's my other comment is like, how do you bring that balance? I don't mean to kind of put the question on you, but I mean just as a society, right? Is how do you create that balance where this is not a taboo topic? This is not something where you don't have one person talk about it and set the rules. The more the general population knows this, the easier it's going to be to really move and navigate these interactions in a very cordial, professional, respectful way.
Right. I appreciate your comment and your question, and while I always prefer that we focus on our local environment and our own families and our own conduct, here in this society, we can still make comments, I suppose, about some of the things that happen in the Muslim world. And there has been, statistically speaking, some comments about how, very high consumption of pornographic material or whatever, comes from certain Muslim countries, Arab countries in particular. There is one of the brothers in the community was telling me, like in like the I think the Sex Addicts Anonymous or whatever, that would be like 50% of the participants are Arab guys, right? But I think what I also wanted to say is that it depends on which Arab or Muslim country. There are Arab and Muslim countries who have normalized polygamous relationships and all the halal access within the confinements of the family. And then there are other countries that have not done that or have failed miserably or do the exact opposite. And I'll give you, for example, Egypt as an example. It's actually worldwide known that I don't think that there is any other country that matches Egypt when it comes to the harassment of women or catcalling. It's been like really completely out of control. But where does that happen? Mainly in Cairo and in Alexandria and some of the major cities. It does not happen in villages. It does not happen in traditional structures. It does not happen in simpler rural areas. It happens in these massive metropolises. Like Cairo has like 22 million people, because it is so not only looked down upon, like it's catastrophic. Like if a man said that he wants to take a second wife, alas, your future is, you're obliterated. Whereas in villages and other traditional settings, it's kind of still respected and tolerated, right? And so, again, I don't mean to give anecdotal evidence. I think this has to all be empirically proven, through science. And, I don't know if I have the right data, but I can definitely see the associations, and I can see the patterns, with my own eyes. And so, Saudi Arabia or the Gulf states in general have some of the least percentages of sexual assault in the world, because they are some of the most liberal countries when it comes to polygamous relationships, where women literally go and they seek the second and the third wife for their husbands, because they know they're going to do it anyway. And so they say, well, I might as well select someone I can live with, right? And so it's a very different cultural setting than some of the things that we see here, or some of the things that we hear about in the news. And those people are also very private. They're not posting pictures about their 4 wives on Instagram. See? So we don't get to see that side of the Muslim world either. You'll see the guy that is posting pictures of his girlfriend in the Mercedes, but you don't see these conservative families talking about their private life anywhere. And so we don't get to take a peek into how they do it. Yes?
What you mentioned, I actually had a real life experience. We had a family friend who had a couple who were from Saudi Arabia, young couple with a child. They were studying, both of them were studying in Canada at that time. And she had 2 years left. She was a medical doctor, and his program was done, and he had to go back to Saudi Arabia. So the wife went ahead and seek a girl hand for her husband, saying that he's going to go back, I have to stay back here, and basically what you said, seek a second wife for himself. And educated woman, a full-on hijabi, but she had no issue. I thought that was pretty astonishing that my friend told me this, and I was like, what? He goes, yeah, and it's pretty normal in that culture to do.
Right, it is. And by contrast, and I don't want to dwell too much on this point, by contrast, there is, again, an Egyptian brother in the community, came here about 5 years ago, not in the Tarbiyah community, but he's in Sacramento. And he came to me for help, and 5 years in America, doesn't have paperwork. So he came here and he got stuck. He's not able to go back. Now, finally, he applied for some papers and he has a pending case. But if he leaves the country, what's going to happen? They will block him. They cannot re-enter. And he literally supports his wife and 4 kids. He supports his mom and his dad. He supports 3 sisters who are unmarried. He supports a lot of family back home. And this poor guy jumps from one gas station to the other and from one McDonald's to the other. And all of his work is done, under the table, as they say. Real hard-working guy. And so he came to me, he's like, I'm really stuck. I was like, what? I said, I've been here for 4 years, and honestly, every single day I get an invitation to do something haram. Every day. And I keep pushing back. I just don't know how long I can handle this. And so I said, okay, be honest and talk to your wife and tell her that you have no choice but to take a side. She can't come here. She applied for the visa 3 times. And every time they rejected her. So she's not able to come. He's not able to go. What is the solution for this guy? The solution for him is to go back home. But if he goes back home, and what's going to happen?
Allah will reward him.
Well, I'm sorry?
You're saying there's no means for him to start a living in his home?
Live in his home where?
Like back home, he has no means to.
No, he comes from an extremely poor village, in the middle of nowhere, and they live in shacks, and he's the only one in the entire family that got a chance to make income for his family.
Ma'am, he do everything for his family. So go back to his family.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If he goes back to his family, then there's no income.
We eat bread together. We report all together.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, guess what? That's exactly what his wife said. That's exactly what his wife said. And she said, nope, you can't marry somebody else. I will leave you if you marry somebody else. Well, guess what he did? He still married somebody else, but without telling her. And then a year later, she found out from somebody else. And it's been 6 months. You know what she said to me on the phone? If he slept around, I would have been okay with it.
Imam Aziz, he still say, make
I don't
haram.
think he was
He
meant in
died.
sincerity. If he was a sincere husband and a sincere father, he would have never secretly done this. I mean, he could have just said, you know what, I have to marry, I have no choice, right? But to do it behind the back of your wife, I think it's beyond that.
It's a mistake. It's a mistake. But again, we're not here to assess the mistake. You know, if someone steals, we're still going to call that person a thief. But we also need to be careful and pay attention to the structural factors in society that make it easy for someone to steal. Why is the rate of theft much higher, the rate of crime much higher in the African American community? Is it because every single one of them is inclined to do illegal things? No. Or is it because society has created some form of a structural racism that makes it very difficult for them to have access to regular opportunities? And so we're going to hold every single person accountable for what they did, but that's not the point. The point is we're trying to understand what leads people to make terrible decisions, the circumstances that lead them to make bad decisions in the first place, right? And so I'm not advocating for one thing or the other. I'm just saying, like, as a leader, I have to assess those things and I have to tie this in with Islamic teachings. The minute we deviate from those teachings, we have trouble. And guess what? Now they're going to have a divorce. And his kids, you know, it'll be like another 10 years before he sees them. They're probably going to be raised by a single mother, and an entire family was shattered. And this guy is traumatized for the rest of his life. And you know what? He's divorcing the other woman too. Because now he sees her as the reason of the fall of his own family. See how horrific the situation has become? And sooner or later, he's gonna get settled. He's gonna find the woman that is an American citizen. He's gonna get his green card. Things are gonna be fine for him. But what's gonna happen to his kids? Again, it's not his wife's responsibility. It's not his responsibility. It's just the way that we, culturally speaking, the way that we treat the teachings of God that are timeless, that are meant to solve problems. Sometimes I have to look at my own preferences and I have to look at God's preferences and say, well, I don't like it, but it's coming from Allah.
Imam Aziz,
Yes.
from my perspective,
I keep
I'm not
talking about super sensitive things and we keep getting in trouble. Surat Al-Nisa is really like,
Imam Aziz, I have different perspective from
Yes.
Quran.
Uh-huh.
Multiple wives come in Quran and structure of taking care of orphans or make some solution to the community is not because I'm sick or I want just relationships, so I have to have multiple wives. There is a legitimate reasons if the wife is sick, need help, or there's orphans need to be taken care of. Not because I have a sickness to go after this desire.
but what if you do? What if you do have that sickness?
Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said,
Wow. Thank you. No more biryani for this guy for the rest of his life.
ماكو شغل ما يشغلونه سرمن جت له ابورتمنت يعني امكانيه يشتغل بالامارات فقال انه حبقى سنه اني ابقى بسوريا ويا الاطفال هاي فهو حنحتاج وانا بالمقابل هم نحتاج وحيوفر لنا الفلوس اوكي زين بس هو لحظه قلنا لو حنعيش سوا لو نموت سوا هاي الاحتياجات احنا يمكن وضع كل صعب انه احنا لاجئين وما عندنا شيء وهو جت له فرصه عمل بالامارات بس اني ابقى بسوريا وفكرنا الخطه اني قلت له روح
بس بعدين ورا سنة حيكونوا أطفالنا حنفقدهم صح يعني without بلا حياة حتكون صعبة بالمقابل إلي هم صعبة أنا ما كان ورا هو هاي مرته عايشة وحد بلا راجل هي صعبة سهلة حياته مو صحيح هي عندها احتياجات فهاي مال هو إنه دا يتزوج ويسوي حرام هو بنفس الشيء دا يكذب عليها هو دا يسوي حرام هذا مثل هذا صحيح هو كله حرام.
No, I agree. What worked for you, though, as a family, may not work for everybody else. You know, your preferences and your husband's preferences are different from anyone else's preferences. The point is that not every man can handle this. Quite honestly, not every woman can handle it either.
Exactly.
Yeah, because many women cannot stay without their husbands for more than 6 months. And then she starts, having all kinds of weird feelings too. And that's why it's actually like, Umar radiallahu anhu made it where the soldiers can only be away from their wives only 4 months, and then they have to go back like on break. Right? And so if you are able to handle a certain thing, you cannot expect every other family or every other woman or every other man to be able to tolerate the same type of difficulty. Like I said earlier, there is an appetite for these things, and that appetite varies, greatly from one person to the other. I cannot say you're wrong because you are trying to act upon the desire that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in you. It's not his choice. It's not his fault. It's not something that he did. It's just how he feels. And if that person ends up divorcing his wife because he has to marry somebody else, then I think that then we're really saying to God, the solution that you've provided is not working for us. Give her a chance to do what? Like you mean like ask her for her blessings? Yeah. She's gonna say no. Yes.
So one of the conditions to marry a second or a third wife is that you have to have adl between the 3 4 wives, right? The adl, the justice. So how is
Correct.
adl and justice that the first wife doesn't know about the second wife?
Again, I am not saying that what he did was right. What he did was wrong. In fact, in the Maliki madhab, this is not a valid nikah because for the Malikis, it has to be made public. Like this ishar is a requirement for the Malikis. And so you don't need to get your wife's permission, but you have to do it publicly, right? And so I'm not saying that what he did was right. I'm just saying I am trying to investigate the modern cultural circumstances that are contributing to the destruction of families. Because this is what we see. If the divorce rate continues to go up, and if the willingness of young people to get married continues to go down, and if all these young people, you know what, I don't want to have to deal with this. Every 6 months I'll have a woman if I wanted to. I am not going to marry anybody, and I'm going to live like this for the rest of my life. I am trying to investigate the causes that led to this current reality that is very unhealthy, and you and I know it's extremely unhealthy. And the Quran is providing us with a solution. And by the way, I am not suggesting that we take responsibility away from men either. Oh, unless you allow me to marry a second and a third wife, God knows what could happen. There's no such thing because we are responsible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And our actions will be judged by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And inability to take a second or a third wife does not give you an excuse to do something haram. That goes without saying. Be that as it may, people still make terrible mistakes. And the percentage of those terrible mistakes is constantly going up. And divorce rates are the highest we've ever. By the way, divorce rates in the Muslim community is now on a par with wider society. Used to be far lower. And I have a feeling that divorce rate in the Muslim community is going to be higher than wider society pretty soon. Because we have very high mahr requirements, because we expect $100,000, because we expect that the guy has to be a doctor and has a PhD, and not everyone is able to meet those requirements anymore. It's becoming very difficult for people to meet those requirements. Some what? Not some. sister, many. It's become far easier for Muslim guys now to marry non-Muslim girls. In fact, I'm going to make you laugh. They actually go to the non-Muslim girl and they tell her, by the way, in my faith, like the Mormons, I have to marry multiple wives. So you need to be okay with that before we get married. And they get the girl to agree. She doesn't have any baggage. She's like, well, my husband is Muslim. Yeah, I know how those Muslim men are. And she agrees with it. And she gives him her consent at the get-go. So she's now becoming more appealing to him than the other Muslim sister that's going to be a stickler and give him a hard time about everything, right? The conversation is not about this, though, right? The conversation, again, is about the Islamic solution and is about the Western solution. And we can decide what to adopt and what not to adopt. This is up to us, right? It's not haram for a wife to say, I don't want my husband to take a second wife. That's your right, right? You have every right to say that, right? I am just addressing this. I'm comparing, philosophically, I'm comparing what the Quran says and the solutions that the Quran has provided versus, what the Western world has provided. So Islam does not, neither encourages nor discourages lusts. Islam just regulates them. Islam accepts them as true and tries to find a solution for them, and that solution is to widen the definition of what is considered family and to create very distinct rules about who we can or cannot marry, right? And I want to make a comment from philosophy, because some of you said earlier that they want to talk to their kids and they want to have legitimate conversations with their kids. And so we need to be able to tell our kids not just halal and haram, but we need to tell them a philosophically sound argument as to why modesty is a necessity, why extramarital affairs are bad, why premarital sex is actually immoral and bad for you irrespective of religion, why homosexual relations are wrong, why transgenderism is wrong. We have to make a philosophically sound argument first and then support it with Islam. And not just say to the kids, well, Quran says this, it's none of my business. I don't make the rules here. Like that's the weakest answer ever. You really have to think about this and provide the kids with something. And so I remember in God and Philosophy, which by the way, inshallah, we're repeating next weekend. We don't have Tafseerah, by the way, next weekend because we're going to have our God and Philosophy session. So in God and Philosophy, I spent, I think, maybe 2.5 years researching a philosophical argument against homosexuality. That is not from Christianity, that is not from the Quran, that is not from religion, just from philosophy, right? And we found a good argument, that is a natural law, if you are familiar with natural law. In natural law, it talks about the morality of action. Yarhamukumullah, what constitutes a moral action, right? And so, what is this? This is a pen, right? Well, it's a fountain pen, but it's a pen. What is the primary function of a fountain pen? Exactly. Now, if I bought a fountain pen for $50 and I use it to write, wouldn't you agree that this would be the moral usage of the fountain pen? All right. Now, if I use the fountain pen in order to throw this at someone's face. Yes. All right. Well, I'm not sure if she's going to use a fountain pen. Maybe she's going to use like flip-flops. If I use this and throw it at someone, wouldn't you agree that this is, number one, this is not the primary function or usage of a fountain pen? Number two, I have used it in an immoral fashion. Okay? Now, with that in mind, so you can apply this literally to every object. Like if I bought a mattress, what am I supposed to do with a mattress? Sleep on the mattress. If I use the mattress to block the door, people are going to say, well, dude, this is stupid. You're just wasting money. You spent $300 on a mattress in order to block the door. That's not the moral usage of the mattress. Like people are going to think less of you because of this. So this is what natural law says, that what makes an action moral is when the device used to perpetuate or to further its primary function or its primary usage, right? Logically speaking, what is the primary function of the sex organ? Procreation, but is it just procreation? Animals procreate too, They will inseminate the female, and then the male disappears. What is it that the human male needs to do as the human male uses the sex organ? After procreation, it's what? It's the sustaining of life. So you can't just bring life to the world and not protect that life, because that life is going to be eaten up or destroyed, right? So the purpose of sex in philosophy, right, is the production and the protection of life, both. So can you have pleasure in the process? Sure, but pleasure is secondary. Pleasure only facilitates the process. Otherwise, it would be like the most disgusting thing to engage in. So it's God's hikmah, it's God's blessings and wisdom to make such a heinous act pleasurable, because otherwise no one would have engaged in this act, right? And so, if the primary function of the sex organ is the production and the protection of life, how can we protect life unless we are staying together as a family? If you inseminate a female and get her pregnant and then leave, then you have performed the first function, which is the production of life, right? But you failed to perform the second function, which is the protection of life. This is why marriage is necessary. This is why people need to stay together in that relationship, in which basically, pleasure is only secondary to the main purpose, which is the production and the protection of life. Now, if you use the sex organ only for lusts and desires, without the prospect of producing and protecting life, wouldn't you agree that this would not be the moral way to use the sex organ? This is what philosophy says. So we adopted this into the argument against homosexuality, because again, they gave us a headache. Oh, don't impose your religion on me, just keep it to yourself. I don't want to hear it. Give me a logical, rational argument. I was like, okay, Habibi, I'll hit you with one. So we found this argument in natural law, and then we basically said the premise number one, the use of an object needs to be, the use of an object needs to perpetuate its primary function in order for it to be moral, right? Premise number two, homosexual acts constitute a usage of the sex organ that does not perpetuate the primary function of the sex organ. Therefore, homosexual acts will be what? Would be unnatural or immoral, right? The same applies to zina. When you think about it, someone that has intimate relations outside the family, remember the definition of the family that we talked about earlier, the mahram, what you can or cannot touch, right? Anytime you have intimate relations or you use the sex organ, if we're being crude, outside of that realm, then the focus is on pleasure. And if the focus is on pleasure, pleasure is a secondary function, not a primary function. Then that act becomes what? Becomes unnatural or immoral. Right? And so, with that in mind, if I go back to Islamic sexual ethics or Islamic sexual morality, it stems directly from this. If I deny people that sex has pleasure, then I am being unfair and unreasonable. But if I say that the only purpose of sex is just to have children, well, that would still be unfair. So we create the family, and then we say every single time a man and a woman are together in that family, the prospect of the creation of life is always there. And therefore, if it happens, then I will be able to protect that life as well. If it doesn't happen, it's not going to happen every single time. Not every intimate encounter leads to pregnancy, right? But at least it's there. Christians, by the way, they take this argument further and they say that's why contraception is prohibited in conservative Christianity. Because contraception turns the usage of the sex organ into something that is just about pleasure, and it inhibits the possibility or the potential of producing life, right? So turning sexuality into an experience of pleasure is logically immoral, aside from religion. It is logically immoral and it is logically irrational. Therefore, any sex act that is external to what that definition of the family is would be unnatural as well. All right? So this is what's happening in society. And this is the logic of philosophy, and this is the logic of religion, which in this particular case they actually coincide. The problem here becomes, okay, is that family unit sufficient in order to satisfy all the appetite for sexuality in society? The Western world's solution is, yes it is. And if you do anything beyond that, well, we're just going to tolerate it because we know it's not working really. And the solution of Islam is expand the understanding of that family so that it encompasses, that form of appetite. So again, with this understanding in mind, that's when you come to ayah number 26. Uh, 25 rather. So detailed all the prohibitions and told you who you can or cannot marry. And then it says, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ مِنْكُمْ طَوْلًا أَنْ يَنْكِحَ الْمُحْصَنَاتِ الْمُؤْمِنَاتِ فَمِمَّا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ. Now, if you tried to marry someone that is not on the list of mahrams, because remember, marrying a sister would be cheaper than marrying a stranger. Marrying a mother would be cheaper. Marrying a stepsister would be cheaper because it's within that same family. It's when I marry somebody else external to this that it becomes a lot of expectations. And so if you financially fail to marry someone from the list of your non-mahrams, then it actually instructs that person, if you literally tried every door and you could not get married, or no one is willing to give you their daughter, then marry one of the slave girls. So last time, if you remember, we talked about sexuality with slave girls in general. And we said that the only source of slavery in Islam is what? Is war. And those slave girls were taken into that society as captives of war because, their men were killed in battle, and then they were brought into Muslim society. And if you let them without any type of regulation, there will be prostitution, there will be all kinds of horrific things, there will be sexual exploitation. So in order to regulate this, the captive and the person that took them in as captive, they have that sort of special relationship. But then the ayah here says, marry one of them. If the ayah says that you can marry someone with whom you already have the opportunity to have sexual relations, then what does the ayah say? Like, this man already has access to this woman as his slave. Alhamdulillah, we don't live in times where there's slavery anymore. It has been completely abolished. Islam's purpose was met, which is the abolishment of slavery, right? But if the ayah says you can marry a woman with whom you already have the right to have sex, then what is the ayah saying? She obviously has to be a Muslim, of course. But what is this encouraging? It's not saying that you have to marry her in order to have intimate relationship with her. It is saying that it's better that you marry her, because that furthers and encourages emancipation. Because if you marry her, she's not your slave anymore. So even though he already has her, yet the ayah says, well, if you can't marry somebody else, then marry one of those girls. And if you marry one of those girls, well, obviously she has to be Muslim, because it says, مِمَّا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ مِنْ فَتَيَاتِكُمُ الْمُؤْمِنَاتِ. So she has to be Muslim. You cannot marry a slave girl if she's not Muslim, right? So she has to be Muslim. But again, the point here is it adds to the list that I shared with you before of the Quranic steps towards emancipation, the Quranic steps towards the liberation of slaves, right? So, and of course, there's going to be so many guys, all these soldiers that just came back from war. They have a slave girl with them because that's all they could get, from the battle. And they don't have any money, they don't have any other resources to marry somebody else. More than likely, they would just marry this girl and she just becomes their wife. Which also, it speaks to the same thing that I was saying earlier, right? that intimate relations that do not lead to the production and the protection of life are, are not good relations. They're not moral, they're not natural. So the only way to make it natural is to marry this woman and to basically make her make her your wife.
Imam,
Yes.
is there a specific ayah that is saying that you have intimate access of malaikat imanatul from the Quran? Like, we're understanding that this was the norm in the culture, but where is that specific ayah that
We've
says
talked about it multiple times in Surah Al-Nisa.
we did?
Yeah.
That you have physical access, not the
Yes.
caregiving, not the guardianship. We talked about the guardianship, right? Where does it say in the Quran that they have the men that were guardians of these women also had physical intimate access? Because in my understanding, the physical access comes only after marriage.
That is not true.
No, not with slaves.
That is definitely not true.
But this is what this ayah is actually saying.
I am familiar with the tafsir that you're using, and it's some type of a modern apologetic way of approaching it. That simply goes against historical evidence, and it goes against the ayat of the Quran. The solution, like I said many times, is not to twist the tafsir. The solution is to take it as is and to try to understand the history and context behind it, and question your own judgment and suspend it and uphold the judgment of the Creator. That is the way to go. I don't know if you were here with us when we talked about the influx of captives and slave girls into society, and and the regulation of sexual relations, and to protect them and to create rights and responsibilities and institutions, and their kids become free, and once he had relationships with her, she cannot be sold to somebody else. You were here when we...
I think I missed that.
Oh, okay. Well, that was the toughest session, and it had all the details. Let's see here. No, we've had extensive. If you want to go, I think it was 3 or 4 of Surah Al-Nisa. If you want to go back to the videos, I think we've really covered that. We've covered it extensively. Mm.
What is the requirement for proving that? I guess the question, the reason I'm asking is like my first-hand experience. I have an aunt here, and she's very giving and caring, and she's gone around trying to do it. And now, when it was time for the sons to get married, it's like there was an older lady, and she was attesting. Oh yeah, I saw your mom. Oh yeah, I saw your mom. Like these guys had zero access to anybody in the village. So is there a way to say, okay, we need like eyewitnesses, or how do you?
So, eyewitnesses.
Big problem.
No, we don't want that.
Yeah.
No, it has to be 5 nurses.
Oh.
5 different nurses. And many of the scholars actually say that each nurse needs to be enough for satiation. Like the baby needs to be fully full. It needs to be full. So it needs to be 10 minutes or something like that. And it needs to be 5 different sessions.
And there has to be a witness saying, I saw.
It doesn't have to be a witness. I mean, it's in that woman's best interest and her husband and the family to verify whether this kid, is their nursing son or daughter or not. Otherwise, their other son might marry her one day, and then they'll all go to hellfire, over something like this. So every family has a vested interest to decide on something like this. Sorry. Yes.
So if you nurse a child, it could be your niece or nephew once, not 5 times. If you nurse them once, what does that mean?
If you nurse them once, it's fine. Then they would still be mahram to your children. Like if you nurse, let's say, your niece once, your niece would still be cousins with your kids, and can still marry them, when they grow older. Now, if you've done this 5 times, then your niece becomes like a foster sister to your own kids, which means they cannot marry her anymore.
But the rule is 5.
The rule is 5 times.
Yeah.
Yes?
Like in these days, in America, a lot of women, when they have a birth, they cannot have the nurse their child. So the other women, their kids died, but still they have the milk is coming.
They're still
So they are
lactating.
selling it on the Facebook. And my question is, when they are giving the other kids and their own kids are feeding and they are selling it or they are giving it as a donor, and when they grow up the kids, they can marry, right? They don't know who nursed their mom.
I mean, non-Muslims sell all kinds of weird stuff on Facebook Marketplace, okay?
It's happening.
You're a Muslim. Your job is to make sure that that doesn't happen to you or to your family. And my advice, don't buy milk from Facebook Marketplace. It doesn't have, it's not necessarily a woman's milk, by the way. This is probably goat milk or something that is.
No, I've heard this going on what you're saying. 'Cause
No, they do that for them. For them, they do all kinds of weird stuff. It doesn't matter to us. What matters to us is what we do and how to protect our own families from these kinds of things. For them, they're not Muslim anyway, so it doesn't make any difference.
I don't think it's just the availability of the milk, it's the bonding process that happens also when a woman is nursing a child. So it's not just availability of milk and there's no
But the mere availability of milk creates a mahram relationship. Whether that mother nursed directly through her breast or nursed, through pumping, or was there or was not there is no distinction. She still becomes a mother to this child. So you have to respect those relationships. Yes?
Islamically, up to what age are you supposed to breastfeed your child?
Oh boy.
Is it different for a female to a male child?
Oh boy. I'm telling you, Surat Al-Nisa is gonna cost me my career, I think. So the consensus of the Sahaba is that this is something that can only happen at a younger age, like when the baby is still in the nursing age, right? With one notable exception that cannot be ignored. Like if it was anybody else, we could have ignored it. But if it was Aisha, we cannot ignore that one. She's one of very few that deviated from this rule. And she said that nursing is something that can happen even to adults. And it would create the same type of mahram relationship. Now, of course, Aisha doesn't mean nursing as in direct nursing through breastfeeding. She means like if an adult actually ingested a woman's milk, like the same amount that would satiate a baby. And if that adult did this 5 times in 5 different sessions, what then? In Aisha's opinion, it would create a mahram relationship. And this has actually been used, especially in Western societies, as an argument that would help people who are adopting older people. Like let's say that there's a family that adopted a teenager. And that teenager is like 16. And you want to make sure that your wife can take off her hijab in front of this teenager. What do? So they, if she has a baby of her own, then she can actually pump milk in a container and have this teenager drink 5 times in 5 different days so that the teenager becomes like her son.
Child services is going to cover.
What was that?
Child services is going to be covered.
I don't know. It's not against the law. It's not against. I know it sounds weird to you guys, but that's the beauty of it. Islamic law never remained silent on anything.
I think that's
It
beautiful.
makes sense.
Because it's the same thing if you were to feed the infant 5 times, right?
But Imam,
And then-
there's an intention here, right? The intent is very important here.
The intent is what?
The intent of the mother who's giving the milk to
Uh-huh.
the teenager, so that it becomes right. It's not because to nourish it.
No, it's to make the relationship halal.
Oh yeah, we don't know. We don't know what her intentions are, right? Like think of a mother that is nursing someone else's baby. like, so she has her own baby and she's lactating, and then she takes, like, her niece and she's nursing it, like sister, she used that example earlier. What is her intention for nursing her niece? Is her intention to nourish the niece, or her intention to be the niece's mother? Mostly nourish, right? But if this is a random child and she decided to adopt this child and she's nourishing that child, but also she wants to become that child's mother, is that acceptable? And if it's acceptable with the baby, then Aisha says it would be acceptable for adults as well.
So what's the appropriate age to stop breastfeeding?
I am doing tafseer, okay? You guys, fiqh is another session.
Can I change the topic and ask you, not you,
I just want to make sure that I'm almost done here.
No, this will get the most views.
one last.
Yes, please.
Can you go back on the ayah 24? Because my last question was reviewing the ayah 24, because it says that within the Malakat Imanukum, they are also entitled for mahar. And, that gives you an idea that, having a physical access of them also has rights and obligations for them. It's just like a wife has. And it talks about nikah also. And so how do you reconcile the ayah 24 with what you just said?
There's so many ayat in the Quran. Go back to Surah Al-Ahzab, for example, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibited the Prophet ﷺ from remarrying, right? لا يحل لك النساء من بعد. It's not halal for you to remarry. ولا أن تبدل بهن من أزواج, or replace one by the other. ولو أعجبك حسنهن, even if you love their beauty, إلا ما ملكت يمينك, except for the ones that your right hands possess. Which means that he cannot remarry, but he definitely can be with his slave girls. And what happened a year after is that the governor of Egypt sent him a slave girl as a gift. Her name was Maria. And the Prophet ﷺ, after this ayah was revealed, he was with her and he had Ibrahim with her. Through his personal conduct, it establishes that this access is legitimate.
Was Maria a Muslim?
She was not Muslim.
She did not accept.
She was not. Well, many of the scholars say that she eventually became Muslim, after she had Ibrahim and stuff like that.
She eventually became Muslim, then now it's obligated for the Prophet to marry her and make her a wife.
No, it's not. He's not obligated to do that.
But this is what 24 is saying.
No. The 24 says that some of your girls are already Muslim, and some of them are not Muslim, so marry one from the Muslims. Because it says here in 24, ومن لم يستطع منكم طولا أن ينكح المحصنات المؤمنات فمما ملكت أيمانكم من فتياتكم المؤمنات. Then take one from the believing girls from amongst your slave girls, which implies that he has believing girls and non-believing girls. Maybe one of them converted to Islam, take her and marry her. Which means that he already had access to her from before, which means he has access to other girls as well. But when it comes to marrying and elevating a woman to that status, then select one that is already a believing woman. And like I said, these questions will be answered if you go back, I think, to session 4, I think. Yeah, 3 or 4. 3? Yeah, is that the one you missed? Oh, man, every session with Surat Al-Nisa literally goes for 2 hours. And we're supposed to finish at 1, you guys.
One last comment about 24 is
Uh-huh.
she has used this ayah for establishing muta. They used the ayah 24 to say muta is halal in their sect. Do you have any comments about that, Imam?
I don't know where in the ayah it talks about an expiring nikah. Yeah, well, the word istamta'a means to experience the happiness and the pleasures of marriage. Every marriage is supposed to give happiness and pleasure. Every marriage. So tamattu' in general in the Arabic language means to find fulfillment and satisfaction and happiness and pleasure in a marriage. That's what it means. Now, what makes mut'a marriages haram is the expiration. That's the only thing that makes it haram. It satisfies all the Sharia requirements otherwise. But there is an intent to divorce this woman maybe after 6 months or 3 months or after one encounter. That's what makes it haram, which makes pleasure the exclusive purpose of the relationship. And that cannot be correct, right? Then what's the difference between this and prostitution? You tell me. If you pay her money in order to be with her once, what's that called? That's called prostitution. Doesn't matter if we have a contractual agreement, it's the same thing. What makes marriage legitimate is that I don't have any intent to leave this woman. I want to be with her for the rest of my life, unless something happens and we decided to leave each other. You know, that's different. So that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Like for them to use something like this, you know, that is way too thin. If that's your argument for mut'a marriage, that's definitely too thin. The other argument, by the way, that they use, which is far stronger, is that the Sahaba practiced mut'a marriage for a few years during the conquests. And that they were prohibited by the Prophet ﷺ later. I said, you cannot do that. If you marry someone with a lasting intention. You cannot say, I'll be with her for 3 days and then I'll let her go. But I'm going to pay her a hefty sum. Yes?
So, in Iran, I forgot the terminology that they use. I don't know if one of them.
Muta, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
it's commonly practiced by Muslim I guess you could say scholars or Muslim clerics in Iran that do this many, many times. It's just not a one-time thing. For them, it's like, 3 years ago I did this, or 6 months ago, or every year.
You know, it's not their fault. You know whose fault it is? It's the fault of the father, the family that allowed for this to happen. If someone came to me and says, I'll give you $5,000 and I'll have your daughter for 2 weeks, you know what I'll do to them? I'll go to jail over this guy. I'll go to jail. If someone insults me.
Oh, correct. You're saying the father of the daughter.
Yes, yes. Who allows this to happen? It's just, it doesn't make any sense. It has to start somewhere. It's very, very sad. Ayah 27, I think, is also important. I want to comment on this quickly. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاللَّهُ يُرِيدُ أَن يَتُوبَ عَلَيْكُمْ وَيُرِيدُ الَّذِينَ يَتَّبِعُونَ الشَّهَوَاتِ أَن تَمِيلُوا مَيْلًا عَظِيمًا. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala desires is for you to have a clear mind. It's for you to have peace. It's for you to not struggle with lusts and guilt and remorse. Because that's what happens. You know, the suppression of sexual desire leads to what? Leads to an occasional explosion. And then after the explosion, what happens? Remorse and guilt. And after that, there is lust and desire that is building up, followed by explosion, followed by guilt. And then these men, they live their lives. That's all they do. All they think about is sex. All they think about is women. All they think about is either they're doing something haram, or they're guilty because they've done something haram, or they're suppressing something haram. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I want you to be coming back to the path. For me, I don't want you to be thinking about this and being so concerned about it all the time. وَيُرِيدُ الَّذِينَ يَتَّبِعُونَ الشَّهَوَاتِ. And people who follow their lusts and weaknesses, what they want is for you to stray completely from the path. Is to always be concerned and is always to be struggling about this. So I actually consider the two calls to be flip sides of the same coin, right? The call to suppress sexual desire and the call to make it uncontrollable, I think they are the same thing in the Quranic language, because they both lead to the same type of suffering and the same type of pain. It's the balance of the Quran that makes this actually work, right? Aisha, by the way, speaking of Aisha earlier, says that there were 4 types of marriage in the days of Jahili. And let me tell you what she says. And I want you to compare this with what happens today, right? This is going to shock you. The first form was the marriage that people practice today. A man proposes to another man for his daughter, right? Or for his sister, whatever, right? Gives the dowry, gives the mahar, right? And then marries her with the consent and the blessings of the family. Okay? Anything wrong with this? That's the regular marriage, right? The second form that was practiced in the days of Jahiliyyah was when a man would say to his wife, after she had purified herself, after her monthly cycle, the man would say to his wife, go to so and so and seek to conceive with him. He would literally identify someone in the community that is known to have had sons. And he would send his wife to sleep with this guy with the hopes that she would get pregnant and then she would give him a son. Imagine. He knows it's not even his. But it's just, the illusion of it, the self-deception of it. And once the pregnancy was established, the husband would resume relations with her if he wished, and this was done out of a desire to have a child, to have a boy. This type was called, nikah al-istibda'. Nikah al-istibda' is literally when you lend your wife's private parts to another man. This was happened in pre-Islamic times, right? Which today we call what? Well, surrogacy is kind of rare, but you know what's not rare these days? Is this the wife swap thing. Yeah, the wife swap is now common. Where, you will lend your wife to somebody else and then that guy will lend you his wife. The third form was when a group of fewer than 10 men, so this woman would have relations with about, 10 men. Right, 7 to 10 men over let's say, a few days. And if she became pregnant and gave birth, and some nights had passed after delivery, she would send for all the men to come, and none of them could refuse to come, culturally speaking. When they gathered, she would say, you all know what happened between us, and I've given birth, and the child is, and she selects one of them and she says, that child is yours.
Like the Maury Povich show.
Exactly. Yeah.
You're not the father.
This is really like the Jahiliyyah Jerry Springer show, right? It's like a reality show. It's crazy, right? And they all have to come, and they are forced to come because if you allowed yourself to be with this woman, you have to take some responsibility now that she's pregnant, right? And if you didn't go, you would be ostracized, which means that you've gotten a woman pregnant, but you refuse to take responsibility for her child, right? So these women, it's just, again, this was normalized behavior in pre-Islamic times, where it's just she sleeps with however number of people, and then she selects one of them. She says, "You are the father," right? No DNA test, nothing. The child is yours, oh so and so, naming whoever she wished. The child would be attributed to that man, and he could not refuse the attribution, right? The fourth form is basically prostitution. So this was not prostitution, right? This was just promiscuous behavior. But prostitution is when there's payment involved. So when large numbers of men would go into to a woman's tent, and she would refuse anyone who came to her. These were the prostitutes. So if you go to a prostitute's tent and she's not ready, she can ask you to leave, right? Unless she hangs some type of a red flag that is flying off of her tent. That means, she's ready to accept payment, right? And so they used to raise those flags at their doors as signs, and whoever wanted them would enter. If one of them became pregnant and gave birth, they would gather together and, basically call the experts in tracing lineage through physical resemblance, because she's been with so many men. So she can't decide who the father is. So she would bring some of those wet nurses or whatever, midwives, and she would ask them to look at the baby and to look at all the men that came to her in order to identify who the father is. So think of this as the ancient DNA test, right? Who would then attribute the child to the man they deemed most likely to be the father. It's wild. So Islam did not come with theoretical solutions. Those were problems that were happening in society. Not very different from ours, by the way. Not very different from ours. Fully accepted and tolerated and institutionalized like things are today.
Well, look at Tinder,
and then be with them at night.
Correct. I mean, there's no morality left in today's model. So today's I mean, the Western society calls us all sorts of names, but really, they're the ones that are backwards. They're the ones that are going backwards. We're not going backwards.
Subhanallah.
We're going forward.
You know,
Everything is structured in our religion. Relationships, values. I mean, look at society where in America, teenage moms, right? What happens to those kids who are born to teenage moms? What about adult women who have multiple relationships with different men and have different child with a different guy? She has 4 kids and there are 2 different fathers or 3 different fathers, or it goes on. And then those kids are left without a father, without a family
Nope.
structure. And then what happens to society? I mean, the impact is so great. Look at just the jail system. And if you interview every single guy or woman and ask about their background, I guarantee you 99% of them did not have a family structure. They didn't have
it's some kind of broken home.
They never had any form of moral guidance, any form of any spirituality, no structure, no father figure, none. And look what Islam teaches you and what the Western teaches you. Look at the difference.
So it's basically what you're saying is that it's the removal of all those structures that protect people that lead to this type of destruction,
And why
which is what society is engaged in every day.
And why do you think they remove God from this country? Why do you think they remove God?
But see, like, I don't know if this is working though. Like, it really, society is crumbling.
They never intended for it to work. From the
No, I
get-go,
suppose not.
These people make good slaves. People who come from broken families, and they make good slaves to corporate America.
Unless they convert to Islam in jail, which they become ours. But see, like, to comment on your thought here, look at ayah, and this is the last thing I wanted to say. Well, I should have ended half an hour ago, thanks to you guys. Ayah number 28 says, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ أَن يُخَفِّفَ عَلَيْكُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala desires to make things easy for you. وَخُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا, because insan by nature is weak.
makes it hard for them.
Isn't it fascinating? The Quran is saying the divine rules will make things easy.
So what you said earlier,
Whereas following all these other corrupt systems is actually what's making your life miserable.
so what you said, when a person cheats, the guilt comes upon them.
Mhm.
Even whether you're cheating your boss, stealing from him, whether you're cheating in an exam, or whether you're cheating on your spouse.
Mm-hmm.
When you do things that are morally incorrect, your soul does not accept it.
Exactly. Because there's fitrah.
Exactly.
Mhm.
It's what it doesn't accept it because it doesn't go with it.
SubhanAllah.
Nowadays, like in corporate America, as part of like benefit package and the perks, surrogacy is completely covered.
Surrogacy is covered?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
There's like, previous company I worked for, I had $32,000 for that. I
Are
know
you
there was
serious?
huge company.
So now we're actively financing the complete erasure of bloodlines and identity and what?
There was $32,000 towards that part of it.
I swear I did not know that. Like that's shocking news to me. SubhanAllah. Like in your health insurance plan that is covered. Wow.
It's part of the perks that they
That's incredible.
That's the same.
Let's stop it here, guys, inshallah, and pray Salat al-Dhuhr. Jazakallah khair for such an engaging. Please don't share this video with anyone. Let it just hide on the YouTube channel. سبحانك اللهم بحمدك اشهد ان لا اله الا انت نستغفرك ونتوب اليك بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر ان الانسان لفي خسر الا الذين امنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله